In May of 1941, we took a trip across the country. We actually went to pick up a car in Detroit. And then we drove to Washington, D.C., and I have a picture up here of my sister and myself paying our respects to Abraham Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. Okay, and that was about 6 months before Pearl Harbor. And when Pearl Harbor occurred, that's one of my earlier memories. I can remember the grown-ups hearing the news and talking very seriously and anxiously. And when I found out what had happened, I was absolutely furious that the Japanese had bombed my country. And I had a little rice bowl and chopsticks, and I threw them in the fireplace. I said, I don't really want to see these again. I'm ashamed to even own them. Well, my sister and I didn't speak Japanese. We had gone to Japanese school for about a few months before the war began, and so our education in Japanese ended at that point. I can remember the blackouts. We were gathered around the radio in the Blake Street house. I can remember the curfews where we couldn't go out, and also the travel restrictions where we couldn't go visit our relatives who lived in Lafayette or Sacramento. And then the evacuation notice came out, and the leaders, my dad included, debated about what to do about it. And then I read a statement that they finally came out, and they said, if this evacuation is really for the good of the country and not just because of pressures from interest groups, then we'll go along with it. And they went along with it. So then we got things together. We got sleeping bags, I remember, big foot lockers. And then one purchase my mother made that I can remember very clearly in my mind is that there was a woman who sewed sewing machines, small sewing machines. And it was it was a Singer featherweight. And it was actually, I think, new that year. And so we had this little sewing machine and in its case, and it went with us on all of our adventures. I got it later on, and I still use it now. You can identify it by certain markings on the case, on the body of the sewing machine, and I've identified it as actually being the one that my mother bought just before we left Berkeley for camps. Well, we reported to the First Congregational Church in order to be sent to camps. Our number was 13603. And it was not only our family number, but it was a number of a lot of the people in the picture that I showed you earlier. My grandparents had the same number, and my aunts and uncles. Well, we got on the trucks to go over to San Bruno, which is near Palo Alto. And there they had the racetrack called Tanforan. And our family was assigned to a horse stall. I can remember being given bags out of cotton where you stuff them with straw to make the mattresses for the bed. And I can remember going to the mess hall. We had these dishes which people use for camping right now, enameled ware, and we took those with us to the mess hall. About 6 months after we arrived in Tanforan, we were transported by train to Topaz, and there I remember that we had to keep the shades down in the train because this all was a rather secret operation. As a matter of fact, I didn't mention earlier that we had to give our cameras to the government or to other people. My dad was an amateur photographer all his life. He had a whole collection of very good cameras, and he actually was able to have a friend keep them for him while we were in the camps. So this thing was supposed to be pretty much a secret, I think. They kept so that's why we had to put the shades down. And I think we were allowed to go out once or twice into areas that were fenced off to sort of stretch our legs and to drink water or something. So then we got to our second destination, which was Topaz, near Delta, Utah. That's off of Highway 40, I believe, and it's south of Salt Lake City. There we were actually in a barrack. Topaz was very neatly organized into blocks. We were assigned to Block 5 because it was near the hospitals, and that's where my parents spent part of their time in the hospitals. Every year, we had made a Christmas card, a photographic Christmas card since 1930. even before I was around, they made them. And when we were in Topaz, we didn't have our camera. So my mother thought, well, we can't go a year without a Christmas card. So she had my sister draw this picture of the mountain, which is very visible from Topaz. And this happens to be the card she sent to Dr. and Mrs. Frank Smith. Dr. Smith was one of the officials of the Methodist Church, and he had spent a lot of time and money helping us, the Japanese Americans, during the evacuation. And what she wrote to him was, and to his wife, said, "Dear Dr. and Mrs. Smith, we have many things to be thankful for in spite of everything. We have a beautiful hospital now, reputed to be the best in the Midwest. So well equipped, hundreds of bedpans, surgical instruments, x-rays, etc. So different from Tanforan. We can well believe that rumor that in the future it will be used for injured veterans of war. However, we are benefited by it now. As the only public health nurse of Topaz, I feel too responsible for the lives of 9,000. Now that I have trained 54 home nurses and 6 public health nurse aides, from next week, I can enjoy life a little more. Working 18 hours a day was quite a strain. I have forgotten so much, but now I feel more confident. Mrs. Dodd has sent us some books and crayons for Christmas. We have turned them over to the education department for the library, where all the children of the center would be able to enjoy them. She has been most kind. We are all very happy and well, and hope the same to you. Signed, Barbara, 54E, Topaz, Utah. And the postmark date on that is December 24th, perhaps, 1942, from Utah. Well, we were fortunate in that Berkeley was a pretty, I guess you'd call them welcoming community. They were not hostile like many other communities. And we were back in our own home. My mother was able to find a job with the city of Berkeley. She was the first public health nurse to be employed in a public institution. That would be the city of Berkeley. My dad started his office up again. He started first in our house, and he was able then to buy a piece of property, a very narrow piece of property on Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley. So he was able to practice in the same city where we lived after the war. My sister and I went to school. Let's see. It was kind of interesting in terms of the fact that the Japanese American community pretty much stuck together. Part of it was because it wasn't because of the church, because they didn't reopen the churches for a while. But we just, I think, perhaps felt safe together. Maybe our best friends were the ones we had gone through the camps with. So our experiences in Berkeley were like our experiences in Chicago. Just, if there were problems, nobody let me know about them. Well, all I can do is express my appreciation to my parents and my whole family for not showing us all their anxieties. I mean, it must have been terrible for them not knowing where we were going and how long we were going to be away. But they didn't let on any of their anxieties to me as a child. And I think I felt secure in spite of all that happened. Looking back on it now, of course, it was a terrible injustice. And if I had realized that, I'm sure I would have been angry like I was at the Japanese for bombing us. So that's